Since I was in mute mode, so let's start beginning again. So good evening and welcome to my second session on GraphQL. So this one, we are going to talk about using GraphQL in front end, or we are going to consume the GraphQL APIs that we have created in our previous webinar. So, and I'm going to use a library called React to showcase how you're going to communicate with an GraphQL API. So who am I? I'm Chatu Viswajit. I'm a Zero ambassador, and I run my own startup and work on JavaScript world. And I'm from Sri Lanka. And if you have any questions or you need to hang out, you can find me in social medias in I am Chatu, except in the Instagram, it's already taken by someone else. And before going to start the session, all the ideas I am going to express in this session and the libraries that I am going to use, they are my personal views and does not reflect the company I work for or any other community that I am represent. Yeah, so I'm going to give a quick recap from our previous webinar. So I'm going to use a superset of JavaScript called TypeScript in this context and the session. So if I giving a quick recap on these things that we discussed in early session. So TypeScript is actually extend JavaScript by adding types to the language. So JavaScript is not loosely typed language, so it doesn't have types. So using TypeScript, we can actually introduce types to the JavaScript. TypeScript also speed up your development experience, and also it try to catch the human errors, providing some fixes before even you run the code. When it comes to TypeScript, it's actually open source, and it is actually created by Microsoft. It's a superset of JavaScript. That means it's kind of it adding things to the JavaScript, but it also supports the JavaScript because it's a superset. And since you are adding more stuff like types and some other keywords also and functionalities, this need to be transpiled, also known as compiled. So you have to compile or transpile the code that you've written in TypeScript. And it also adds support to JavaScript, as I said earlier. So it gives types. And it also introduces some object-oriented programming features like private fields and cars and interface, and are already there in JavaScript, but it was there in earlier version of TypeScript even before it's come to the JavaScript. Not the class part, the interface part. And it also supports upcoming ES features rather than waiting till it reaches the browsers and the JavaScript environments. You can actually experiment and experience the new features coming up. And it also adds support to your code intelligence. Like if you're using VS Code or any other coding environment, IDE, it gives the code completion support since you have types, and TypeScript also kind of act as a document of your code because you have types and what the return types will be and what are the parameters that you're going to use. So it creates its own documentation rather than you going to write one. And there are some tools that you can actually create an HTML documentation out of your TypeScript code just to generate without any code. And the second thing that we are going to talk about is GraphQL. We already had a kind of a thorough introduction in our previous session, but I am going to cover a little bit again for the viewers who may be joining us as a first time. So GraphQL is a query language for the APIs, and there's a runtime for fulfilling those queries. So it's kind of a query language and a runtime. I said all of this, but it's actually a specification. It does have an open source repository, which all the specification is a long documentation, with all these features that we are described. It is open source, as I said earlier, and it is actually introduced by Facebook. And now the community also contributed, so Facebook and the community. And since this is a specification, there are multiple implementation of the GraphQL servers and clients. How to create GraphQL content and how to consume that contents. So since there's a specification, multiple communities and multiple organizations created multiple implementations. So we are going to use an implementation called Apollo. And GraphQL gives you declarative data fetching, which means the API user, the one who actually from the client side, they can actually declare what the data that they want from the API, and you get exactly that data only, nothing behind or nothing more. And using this concept, we can actually reduce the data that transfers like small devices like mobile phones. So you only request the data that actually you want rather than getting whole data structure. And you can actually query multiple resources in one request, not like in REST APIs, like you send in multiple requests to get some data, the relational data. But from here, you can actually send only one request and get multiple resources at the same time. And it's actually strongly typed. The all data that you are fetching, it has a types, what kind of a data type it has. And also when you send in some data like to input or update something, it also check the types. So it's very strongly typed from the GraphQL layer itself. And GraphQL is actually a way of exposing resources from a service. It's not a way of managing a database. It has a concept called schema, but it doesn't mean it is a database schema. It can be a schema generated from database. It can be a schema jointly generated with the API or a database, or it can be just a schema generated or created for an API, a REST API, or it can be a multiple data sources, like combining multiple data sources like REST API, database, and some other third-party APIs and another GraphQL API. So it's kind of a gateway thing also included in GraphQL. And let's see how this GraphQL process works. This time I put the exact example we are going to try today. So first we need to describe the data. So this part we actually did in our previous session. We actually created our database schema and GraphQL schema. So this part is actually in your server. You need to define the schema for the GraphQL. So as in here, there's two object type data defined. So one is book and one is author. So we call it as object types. And we have a scalar types, which are actually created the object type like string. And there's data time is actually custom scalar type, but we have numbers and all stuff. So we have a book which has an ID of string type, and we have a name type of string likewise. And in book, there's an author field which has a type of author. So it actually connects another object type, and we will be moving forward. So then you declare in your front end what data you want. The declaration, you want books with ID and names and year. The books is actually an operation. We call it a query because this is getting data out. If you want to put something, we create a mutation. So this is a query for books. The operation name is books, plural form. So, and we get ID and name and year only. You can see there's another data associated with the book. We have created that an author, but we are not going to get them. This will be the results. So you get the result as you requested. You requested books with the property ID, name, and year. Can be an array, it can be objects. is from the declaration of this query operation name books. So let's move forward now. So what we're going to build today is a bookstore. So bear with me with my design skills. So this is going to showcase your books from the GraphQL database. And when you click on a book, it will be going to be like this. It's going to be give you some information or details inside that book, like ISBN number, who's the author, and when the author is born. So this is the thing that we are going to build. And this UI is actually scaffolded using the library called Material UI for the React. And we are going to jump to the code now. But not like previous time, I'm going to explain something first and then move to the code, and I'm going to get back and explain something and move to code. So there's will be slides and codes interchangeably. So things we need for this demo. So you need to have some kind of understanding on React and React Hooks API. And you need to have a kind of IDE of your choice to open this one, maybe VS Code or WebStorm. I don't know, it's your preference. And you need to have a cheat because we have this project hosted in GitHub. And you need to have the configured previous project from my previous webinar. You can get it from this URL, or you can follow along with me and later you can clone it and configure it. It is in README how to configure it. And you need to make sure that you are in the master, not you are in some steps like in our previous webinar. Make sure you are in master and you have the recent commits. I actually put some commits today also. So there are some changes from our last webinar. So one thing is actually to showcase the GraphQL features. Previously, we actually only put an author as just a property there, just an author name only. It also resides in the books. Plus this time I thought of showing the power of GraphQL. So I actually moved the author to a separate type. So it's a separate object type as I showed in that previous example, the flow. So this author has a name and a birth year and country with the properties. Bear with me, I'm not good at describing the author. So these are the properties that I came up with mine. So I also updated the seed function to run some sample data with this new structure. So make sure that your schema is clean before you run the seed, because you may have the previous data if you tried with my previous session. So make sure that you clean the database and run this one. So it will be hands-on. So this repo will be in this URL that we are going to work on, and make sure that you are starting with the step 1 branch. So that will be the starting scaffold project. I will be explaining on the project before we are moving that one. Let's see what's the GraphQL API schema that we came up with. So let's jump into a GraphQL playground. If you actually was in my session, we actually talked about GraphQL playground. It's actually an interactive GraphQL API consumer. I also have the documentation of your GraphQL and what are the types, what is this your schema. So it's currently running on my localhost 4000 port /GraphQL. So let's see, should be running. Oh, no, not here. So this one. I'm going to zoom a little bit so you can see. So this is we call GraphQL playground. It's actually built on top of another open source project called GraphQL. It's from Facebook, and this is actually also open source project. And this one has super UI, and as you can see, you have the documentation of my GraphQL API. So we have 3 queries and 1 mutations. The queries are the way we read the data. we get that it's like a GET request in REST APIs. And mutation, we are going to change some resources or execute some task in the server rather than getting any data. So mutation is like your CRUD API, like not CRUD part, the read, except the read part, like updating, creating, and deleting. So I have one mutation to add book. So we actually tried that one in previous session. So we are going to move with the new changes. So if you go to schema, we can see the schema, what is my service look like. So I have a type author. No, not scrolling is not good because of the zoom. Maybe I zoom a little bit. So yeah, so I have a type author, and it's at the ID. As we as I discussed in previous session, the apostrophe, not apostrophe, the exclamation mark in ID means that it cannot be null. It should be there. It's mandatory. So if you remove that part, like when you're generating the schema, you put nullable true, it's going to be kind of a null can be null, it's optional, but this time is actually mandatory. So it has an ID, name, country, and birth year. As I explained, then birth year is actually integer, so it's a numerical value. And we have a book. Book also has IDs, ISBN, a string, name, string, and ID. Chain the year is an integer, and we have created that. We have an author, and it's mandatory. So we have a mutation, and this is the mutation input for the new book one, and we have another input for the author input, which I am not exposed yet, I think so. Yeah. So we have queries for authors. We can get query a list of authors, and we have query to book by ID to get a single book from the ID. So it actually accept an argument with a string type mandatory called ID, and we have the books endpoint where it's going to give you all the books. So if you're going to run a sample query, let's see. I already ran it, but skip. So we can define a query, and we can this time give you an operation name. So what is this operation? I'm going to get all books. And inside that one, I can actually define the query. So I need to have the operation name of the query. So query name. So it's going to be books. You can see it's already auto-completing the things because of the types. The GraphQL had all types in there. So books also have an ID. I need ID, and I don't need ISBN. I just need name. Or maybe, and let's try these two first. So I'm going to get an array, the books as I defined in here, and it has an ID and name only. And if I want to get the author, since it is referencing the author type, I cannot actually run this one. You can see there's a red line in here which means an error. The field author type must have a selection of subfield. Do you mean author something? So yeah, that's cool. It's going to help us. So I can get the name, just the name. You can see now it's included the author name as a subfield, as subject object. So if you did it in a REST API, you already need to do kind of two requests to get these things, because authors in a separate resource and the books are separate resource. And it only return me the name, so it doesn't going to get other field, just only this one. Otherwise you will get all the information, like in here it also has country, so you can get the country. So yeah, it's going to be kind of declarative API. So this is how we are defining the declarations of the things that we need, and the same things we are getting out from the server. And if you're moving forward, so next thing is we are going to use the Apollo client. It's an actually abstraction over the GraphQL API to how to communicate. So it's an abstraction of HTTP logic used to communicate with the GraphQL API. Still, we are sending the request as HTTP. So the GraphQL is just an HTTP server also. It's only as the definition, then the spec is there. So it doesn't create new protocols. So it's using the same old HTTP protocol. It also has the capability as a client-side state management. I mean, the Apollo Graph, the client, it has the state management also. If you're using like Redux or MobX, like another state management, GraphQL, the Apollo client for the GraphQL, you can actually replace that things with the local client state management, which that library offers. It also framework independent. This GraphQL client you can use with Angular and Vue and React. It's kind of a framework independent, but for the React, they haven't support with React hooks and some other support for the React, which I am going to showcase. So this is how we are going to start. First, we need to install the Apollo client's dependencies. The Apollo client comes with Apollo Boost, and for the React to work with React hooks, you have Apollo React hooks, and the GraphQL is from Facebook about to how to run the GraphQL queries and extract the data to coming up, and for the all the communication to how to generate the types and all stuff. It's coming from the GraphQL package. So let's add this one. I hope I have some. Yeah, I have the terminal support. Glad. I'm going to zoom a little bit so you can see it, and I'm going to hide this for now. And I'm going to use the VS Code terminal, and you can see in here I'm going to use the command yarn add Apollo Boost and at Apollo / React - hooks and GraphQL these three dependencies. So I'm going to install these ones. After that, I'm going to show you the project, what the state that we are currently in. And I will be going around the code and explaining you the things that I already written, starting from the index maybe, yeah. So I actually bootstrapped the project with a create React tab. I think you already heard it. So this is the command that I use, create React tab, and you give the name of your project, and I'm going to use the template / TypeScript. So it actually generate a TypeScript project, not like normal create React tab, which is generate a JavaScript project. This is going to be generating the TypeScript project. So if you see the project, it has index.tsx and some JavaScript based concept for the we call it declarative files for the React scripts, and we have service worker came from the create React tab and that test setup. So things I already add is these three folders: the components, containers, and the routes. This is the way that I structured the project. It's up to you to decide the way you want. So index.ts, I actually only added this dependency. It's a typeface Montaga. That's the font that I'm using. You can actually install these fonts from npm. You can just add yarn add typeface - Montaga. The most of the Google fonts available in this way, where you can use with your create app projects and Gatsby.js projects. These repositories are maintained by Gatsby team. So I just use that one to set up my font. And I'm using the UI from Material UI. So I use their theme provider to set a theme. So theme has some stuff. Let's see. Let me try to explain it to you. So I define the typography. I got override and I put my own font here. So this is actually included in the Material React website, how to put your own fonts. So this is actually out of the documentation. Apart from that, I just define the a links declaration to none, so it doesn't have the underline when you have the links. So that's the change that I already put. And if we go to, apart from that, I have React suspense setup. So because I'm using React lazy to lazy load the components, some of my components, so it actually makes the download size of the first page load less, because it doesn't going to download everything at first. So to run the React lazy load, you need to have a suspend component in top of your component tree. So I put it in here, and I'm using React router DOM to set up my routings. So this is the setup, and scroll top is actually when you navigating the routes in mobile device, it it sometimes doesn't reset your scroll position when you move to another page. Like if you are in the index and you scroll down to end, and if you then click a link and move to another page, it also will be in the end of your scroll position rather than moving to first top. So I use this hack to make it. This is actually from their GitHub issues. You can use this kind of a component to make it work. And this is a switch to have multiple routes. And I'm using a layout component, and inside I have the multiple components. I use the layout to put the app bar. So let's first see how this app runs and then move these components. So it's loading. Hopefully, I think it's working. It's still starting up the development server. Yeah, it's running now. So this is the current view. It has a top navigation, the app bar, and there's a logo. When you click it, it's going to be home page. And we have some title called books, and we have a list of some books. And this is a card component, 3 card components. And when you click it, it's going to go to the URL called books/1 or the ID, and it has some placeholder values: book name, year, ISBN, author name, and born or something. So this is without any API connect. This is a dummy components, so I can actually use them to put the data in. So that's the current state of the application. So let's go to again to this route. So my route are set up in a public routes, and I use the map to use this one. So let's move to see the routes into the public routes. So in the public routes, I have defined an array. The route will be rendered using home, and home is imported directly because I need to have the home component in the first request. When your site is request, I want to have the home inside that request response. And there's another route called /book/book ID. So this is the parameter, the URL param, and I use book detail component for this to render in this this request, this route request. And for the book detail, I actually using a thing from lazy. It's called from React. It's called lazy. So it's actually going to dynamic. This is the dynamic import syntax in JavaScript. So it's actually import the file from here dynamically as when this function is called. And using lazy, it's actually instruct the bundler in the React script to make a separate chunk file. So whenever you run this one, the server, whenever you want this one, it's going to send another request to server and request for the chunk of the book detail and render it. So there will be a kind of a delay when we have transitioning from the route to route, but it's worth for the performance of your first download. If you have multiple routes, so better to have that kind of lazy setup. So we have a components, few component to use. I have an app bar component. So it's using the material app bar component and some of the stylings to change the look. And it's a kind of a, this is a link to the bookstore to make it to the home. So this is the route link. And the things that we are going to use is this part. So we are going to use this component, the book component, which is actually repeating in here. So this is the book component. Go to inspect, go to, should be in here. Oh, okay, I cannot see the React component part in here. So let's go. So this is the book components. It's actually using a for map function to loop through. So if we go to containers, the containers have the states and the components are dumb components. Yeah, it doesn't have a state. So in my home component, I have defined a hard-coded array with books, which has an ID, name, and year. And I use that loop to loop through and create a book components. That's how that book got rendered. So this is the project, and book detail is actually another component. It's actually have the placeholders for these ones we need to fill up in our this session. So we have time left. So let's move to the session. So we already done this one. So let's move forward how to work with the Apollo client and start getting data from the GraphQL API. So first part, we need to have an Apollo client instance. So we can create an instance from Apollo client and we need to pass the URI. So we need to give the width of your graph where your GraphQL API resides. So it's currently running in localhost 4000/GraphQL. And let's do this first part and let's move to the next part. So I need to create that one. I'm going to create it in my app.js file. I'm not going to pollute my index.js file, TS file. So this is going where I'm going to use it. So I'm going to create a client variable and I'm going to create a new Apollo client. If I'm using TypeScript, I hope it is going to help me with code completion, hopefully, or suggestions. So I need to do it myself. It was working previously, I don't know, maybe RAM usage is high when we streaming. So Apollo client from, I'm going to import it in Apollo Boost. And should we have the errors gone? So I need to have a URI. HTTP local host. Okay. Some kind of error is coming out. I'm not sure. Expression expected. I think it's not repatched yet. Yes, it's still compiling. So let's see what's the thing I need to copy and paste. To copy it, I think like. Seems I maybe imported it in wrong. Let's see my code in open source repository. Currently the working version is pushed into the repository itself. So if you want to try it out, it will be ready after the session. Okay, the thing is, it's not the should be a default export from the Apollo Boost. Okay, so it's working now. Did not refresh. My VS Code is slow. Okay, that's why it's slow. So let's move to second step now. So second step is we need to give this client to hold our app, because we are going to use React hooks in next steps. So to access this Apollo client in the hooks, I need to define a context provider. So it is actually Apollo provider. It has Apollo, it creates a context for the Apollo where you will be in the child components of the Apollo provider. You will be able to access the client and use the hooks to communicate with the GraphQL APIs. So I need to put the Apollo provider in top of the application. I'm going to wrap it, the whole application, with the Apollo provider. Yeah, let's see. So Apollo provider is actually from the hooks package. So I'm going to import it. And it's actually a child export. So Apollo, we can let the things go to suggest. That's React hooks, and it's exported from there. So it should be helping me. So I need the Apollo provider. So I'm going to wrap all the thing with Apollo provider. And it has a prop called client, and I'm going to pass my client variable that I am actually created in here. So I am passing this client to here, and I need to close the tag, the provider. So it should be working now without any compiling errors. Yeah, compiled successfully. And if I check it, should be errors going on. Okay. Still, we are not getting the data. This is the dummy data that I have set up. So it's time to remove the dummy data and get the data up. So let's move to the next step. So next step is we need to write our GraphQL API query. So this is the query that to get the data. So as you remember, I already wrote this query in GraphQL playground. So it has a query. The query name is operation name is all books, and the query name is books, and I have the ID, name, and year. So I am only getting these three values from here. So let's write the GraphQL query. So thing is, when it comes to GraphQL queries, you cannot just write this one because it's a GraphQL query. So how are you going to define it? There's another library called GQL from GraphQL Boost. So it's actually help us to run the GraphQL queries. It's going to format all the stuff and create a string with all these details to work with the GraphQL queries. So this one will be put in my home page. So this is the page currently have the books. I'm going to define here maybe in better ways. So we actually normally extract this one to a separate file, all the GraphQL queries, so we will be able to reuse them. But for the demonstration purposes, I'm going to use it here. Get all books is maybe put in all caps in here. Get all books. Just an what you call it, the standard community standard. So in this, between these two things, you can actually type your GraphQL query. So I'm going to give a query name. You can see there's a highlighting available because I have a GraphQL plugin set up in the VS Code. Get all books. So this name will be used by Apollo client to cache them. So you can give the query name like that. So it will be flatten the data and normalize it and use this one to create the indexes. So I'm going to get the books and I get a name and yeah. Yeah, that's the query. And I need to import the GQL package. So it will be loading and you can see where it's imported. It's imported from the Apollo Boost. And I'm going to put it in the top of the imports. So I can save it. And it will be compiled that it will be blame me that I have an unused variable defined called get underscore all underscore books. Yeah, assigned the value, but I am not never used. Yeah, I'm going to use it where the compiler. So it's the ESLint blaming it. So next step. Now you can use a hook called use query to get the data out. So use query actually return an object which has an field called loading, error, and data, and there are many. But these three things are the things that we are going to use now. And you need to pass your GraphQL GQL query into the use query parameters. So that's where we pass that define all books part. And we need to complete the component using the loading state and error state and the data. Because when it comes to GraphQL, it has a loading time to get the data. So data will be undefined for this time. And if there's an error, data will be again an error, undefined. So let's try to work with this tree. So I'm going to import use query now. I hope it's imported, and I'm going to pass get all books. Let's check the import. So import didn't happen. So it should be imported from Apollo at Apollo/React hooks. Let's give it a chance to auto import it. I hope it already imported, or otherwise I need to import it. So I will be going to import because it's slow. I'm going to import it from at Apollo. React hooks. And it's called use query. There's use query, there's use lazy query, there's use mutation, and few other hooks from React hooks of the GraphQL. So now I need to use the returning types of this one. So it actually giving me loading state. And yeah, my PC got a little bit slowly. Let's see, it's fine. Error and data. So I'm going to tackle the first step of the loading. If loading is true, I'm going to return. I have a component called loading. I created a small component just to show loading status. Should be imported, but it didn't import it. Okay, imported. And I'm going to handle the error state also in here. There's an error. I'm going to return and just an error. Say error. So now I have data, and you should know that if there's a data, it should be data.books, and it has the ID name and year. So for that, I can use data.books. Since data can be undefined, I can actually put the optional operator that recently introduced, and I need to give the types for this one since it is not implicitly coming from the books we define in here. Previously it is come implicitly from them, so this time it's not there. So I'm going to define id as a string and name is a string, and here is a number. Okay, things go smooth. Let's say it should work, fingers crossed. And the thing is, yeah, now we don't need this one. It's complaining my dummy data. It's defined but not used. So I'm going to remove it one, and that's it. Let's see the compiling going on. Looking for the type check results. Completed. Oh, I'm going to repeat it again so you can see it. It is almost instantaneous because it is in localhost. So it get data. The only thing is that my MongoDB is actually hosted in Singapore region. That's the only part that data is pulling on. Apart from that, the server and the front end actually both are in localhost. So these data actually coming from my database. So if we go to inspect and go to network tab, and if I refresh, you can see there's a request going for GraphQL. It's a fetch request. You can see it's going to be like operation get all books. Query is the query. It's just an JSON sending as a payload, and you will get the response. Let's go to preview maybe. Yeah, it's got data, the books, and IDs. You can see it's only return ID name, and there's a type name which is coming from the GraphQL, and this is to communicate with the GraphQL client. So to do the caching and all stuff, it has a type name to do the caching. So yeah, that's the data part. So we are getting the data just from the plain query, and we only get the data that we only wanted for the request. So we only get the ID name and year, even though we have many other things available in the API, but we only get these three. It's declared what we want. And let's see the next step. So we actually completed the component using the loading state and the data. And step 5 is to get book details. Or when we click this link, I need to have the book details pop up here. You can see the ID is coming from MongoDB and it's already updating in here. And but we don't have the data for each book. So we need to get this data: book name, year, ISBN number, and the author's name and the author's birthday. So this is the query for that kind of variable data, because this book ID is going to be changed based on the click that we put. So it's like when we select this book, it's need to put that data. So we need to kind of a way to tackle this dynamic nature of the data. So for that, the GraphQL support variables. So you can define a query. So let's jump into the playground and we can work on that one. So this is the query that I already written. I'm going to hide this one a little bit for now. So this is like a just normal query, and you can just define get book by ID or whatever you need. Get book details maybe. Okay, I'm going to edit it and wipe it completely. Okay, so get book details. And this is how we are going to define a variable. It's called a dollar mark with ID, or the variable name. It should be starting with a dollar mark, and you need to give the type. It should be a string, and it's mandatory. So if you are not sure, you can go to the docs and go to the, this is the thing that we are going to call. So this is going to be book by ID. And you can see it request an variable name called ID, and it need to be a string, and it is mandatory. So this need to be the same type for your variable to make sure that you adhere that things. So now we are going to call book by ID, and we can actually pass request ID, and we can just pass that variable. And you need to define what are the fields that you already you want to know. You want ID, want ISBN, and you're going to get name of the book, and you need the year. As I remember, you can see the UI. So you need book name, year, ISBN number, and author name, and yeah, let's see. So we need author name. So we have an author object, and we can access the field data. We need name, this, and birth year. So since you define this as a variable, you can pass that variable from the query variables in this in playground. So I'm just going to copy this one. It's a lengthy one. So you can actually type this one, and when you put this one, it's going to give you the automatic suggestions. You can press I, it automatically complete the ID, and you pass the, so it is completely variable. So you can change it in here, and the code is going to be use that one to generate. And so only thing I don't like is it is going to be written as book by ID, the operation name. I don't like that one. I like if it is data.book or something like that. So I can change or give an alias to this one using book and then colon. So if I run it, it's going to be book. So any thing in here, you can actually change the way you like. So I can change the year or something if you don't like the birth year. So I just going to keep it in. So you can actually change this field with the aliases and get the exact name that you want in your front end or whatever your preference. If you don't like the things that return in from your server, and if you don't have any access to change the server, so you can actually use the way aliasing. So I'm going to use this and copy, so I can use that the same query in my code. So this time I'm going to put it in a book detail page. So the detail, I already can access the book ID coming from the route, like defined in here. So this one I can actually access from the route. It called use params, and I can destructure and get the book ID, and use params is actually imported from React Router DOM. So I'm going to define my query now. Const get book details. I'm going to use the GQL to type my GraphQL query. It's going to generate the GraphQL query for the request. I'm going to just paste the thing that I completed in the GraphQL playground and just paste it out. Okay, so let's get back to the slides and let's see the next step. So this is the same thing that we actually created in the playground. So next step is to it's also same that we are going to use the use query but in use query there's a next parameter where it's an object. We can define the variables and pass the variable values. So let's use this method and try to complete this one. So it's blaming me that I didn't forget to import the GQL. So it's already imported now. I'm going to put it to up. So I'm going to import use query time const use query. It should be imported automatically. Let's see this time. Not yet. Oh, I need to manually import it here. Okay, it's already imported. Yeah, I can move it up. So it returns object with loading. So this is the structure in the object, the returning object. Return the error and we got data. And it also returns, you got the options. It's already loading, call, silent, fetch more, network status, and we can actually use some other operations are there. We can define the caching also. So I'm going to get book details. So get book details is the query, and I'm going to define the variables. So this is the variable passing that in here. So I'm going to call variables, and I'm going to pass an object. The variable I defined is ID. This is the ID, and I'm going to define that one. And the value for that ID is from book ID variable. So I now defined everything, and I need to put that use data and loading and all these states. So I'm going to define if loading define, I need to return a loading component. Yes, I need to import it. I hope it will be automatically importing. Okay. And I'm going to define the error state and the error handler. So if it is error, so for now I'm actually hard coding these things. You can actually have your own error component to handle this one. Now I have data. So I'm going to use restructuring again for the data. So should we have data dot book now? The book will be having ISBN, name, year, and author. So yeah, the ID is actually I got it for GraphQL client, so it can actually cache with using this ID. Normally, it requests ID type of the GraphQL to get the caching, or it uses ID or underscore ID by default. Otherwise, define a field type of ID. It use that one to cache in this thing. So if you're using this these things, it will be caching still, but I didn't set up caching for Apple client yet. So I now have these variables, so I can actually replace this one. So name will be name, and the year will be year. ISBN will be ISBN defined in this destructuring part, and I'm going to use the author name. Should be author dot name, and the born should be author dot birth year. If you don't like this one, you can use an alias and change it. So it's blaming me. There's no corresponding tag. Okay, yeah. It's actually close this one. It should be a fragment. So we define the query in here, constant get details, and you put the GraphQL query in here, and we get in the parameter from use params from the React router, and get the book ID of the past book, the click book, the URL, and we use the loading stats and the data, and we pass that as a variable in here. This is the ID we declared. It is in here. So the declared one. So it should match that one in the variable. And I'm getting the book and destructure that object into ISBN name, and here you can type data.book.isbn or data.book.name. So it is going to be kind of more repeating, so I just destructure it here and use the simple names. So if we check it, oh, it already refreshed. So it has Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets name and the ISBN number, J.K. Rowling and born in 1965. I can go to form, and I can go to fantasy speaking and where to find them. Can see the ISBN number 2001, J.K. Rowling, born in 1965. And go to Angels and Demons in 2000 and Dan Brown. Yeah. So these are the books I currently put into the database. So you can actually, these are things going to be loaded up. So let's move to the presentation now. So yeah, we completed that step. So it's the simple way of demonstrating how to communicate with the GraphQL API. And time is kind of almost getting very closer to finished. So this is your homework. I already have one mutation called add book. You can use it to add a book. So it's your time to use your preferred way of handling forms. I normally use React hook form, and you will be able to go to the documentation. If I go there, this is a complete documentation from the Apollo docs. You go to fetching data and go to mutations. And there's a method called use mutation. So I'm going to zoom a little bit. We use query, and there's another hook called use mutation. And you have a simple guide where you can first you need to define your mutation. So we already did it in our previous session to how to add a book. This is our mutation. Add book, you need to have add book type of, and it's mandatory. I put this at an input, so you can define your variables with input, name, ISBN, author. So this is kind of different now because I changed it. You can go to docs and go to add book and tree how it's going to be working on. Should be updated now. And you can use the mutation, and mutation is kind of a different. The first is going to return an array, not like object in previous time. This time it's going to be returning array. The first object of first parameter of the array, the first element of the array is the function to call the mutation. So you can name the function the way you like. It is add to do, or is it add a book, is add author, or whatever the thing that you're doing, you can name that with your name. And the data is actually returning data after the call. And when you submit the thing, you can just call it and pass the variable with the requested variable names. I have input, so you change it to input, and you just put the object of the data, and it will be running the mutations. And you have some other documentation how to update your cache when you do the mutation. So yeah, that is a kind of advanced thing to do now. So yeah, let's move on. So GraphQL, we covered Apollo client. It just had one option to communicate with the GraphQL API. There are so many options. There's also one called Relay. It's from Facebook, but it doesn't support hooks yet. It is in actually their timeline, the roadmap. It will be soon supported, but Apollo actually already support the hooks, and it is very convenient if you are using hooks in your day-to-day life. So if you like hooks, so Apollo client is a way to go with the hooks, and Relay still implementing the hooks. Otherwise, you need to use the query component and use the query component variables. It's a component on component architecture used for the Relay. And Apollo client support the caching, so you can go through the documentation. They have a cache for in-memory. And Apollo client works with React Native. So if you're building a mobile applications, you can use same use mutation, use queries, and all the hooks inside your React Native application. And you can use React async storage to cache the data. And Apollo client also supports the state management. It's a little bit complicated, frankly. I'm actually got stuck using that one. I'm using the context API and other options. I'm not yet very fan of using the Apollo client as a state management yet. Maybe in future, I'm not sure. Maybe there will be another options like recoil coming from Facebook for the state management. I'm not sure about what will be the preference, but you need to update yourself if you are in JavaScript where there will be things come and go. There will be things going to remain. And as a summary, so we did a small recap from our previous session about TypeScript and GraphQL. I'll give you a quick recap and some points about TypeScript and the GraphQL, and then we move towards to the Apollo client and give a kind of an introduction, what is Apollo client, how to use it. So then we did an hands-on session consuming the GraphQL service that we built in our previous webinar. So we used that data and that same API to grab the data and display it in. And for your more, if you are more keen on resources, so TypeScript, for if you want to know more about TypeScript, you can go to typescriptlang.org. And for the GraphQL.org is there for all the spec and all the information about the mutations, queries, object types, the scalar types, and all the stuff. And you can go to Apollo GraphQL docs/React to the documentation of the React implementation, the hooks and all stuff, or you can go to Apollo GraphQL docs to get the client details. And you can use Apollo client with the Angular and Vue also. It's a framework independent client. And you can get this code base from my GitHub account. You can go to github.com/iamchatu/React GraphQL TypeScript. The whole code, the running code will be there. If you want to follow along the video, just clone it and check out the branch with step 1 and start doing the same thing that I did in the session, and you will be doing the same things and you will be matched to the master branch. And to run that one, you need the backend server that we built in previous session. It will be in this link, TypeScript GraphQL backend. Use that one to and configure it with your MongoDB. MongoDB Atlas is offering you a free tier with 512 MB databases for each project. Go there, create an project, create a cluster, database cluster, and get the connection URL. And I have all the information how to create it in the README of this TypeScript GraphQL package, the repository. So follow along. If you have any questions, you can actually, our WTM Manila team has a Google Classroom set up, so you can ask any questions in this class code. You can join the classroom and just create question in there, or you can always find me in Twitter at iamchatu. I am very much kind of love to help you out on these questions. You are open for Node.js or JavaScript or React related or GraphQL related questions. I will be more happy to help with the knowledge that I have. And before going forward, I'm going to show you again the demo. It's kind of lively, so it has books, and you can click it, and it's going to get that data again. Yeah, kind of works. And this is a credit for the people. I'm going to special thank all the people who made this awesome resources free. The slide carnival template that I'm using for the slides, and the photos are from Unsplash. And the slide and the code is actually reviewed by my friend Pubudu Kodikara. And I want to thank WTM Manila G and all the organizers of the WTM Manila and the Google Developer Philippines, Developer Group Philippines, for inviting me and having this webinar for you. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity also. And thank you very much for all the people who are in the online session and watching this one. Yeah. So to be continued. Hope so. I will be doing some more sessions with WTM Manila. And if you have any other preference, just ping them. They'll be happy to give you more sessions. See you in some other session. Till then, have a nice day.